Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to see this many of you at the town hall. This has always been my favorite segment. I think that this is really a really important conversation. And so we have a lot to share with you, but we're also conscious that we want to listen. So we'll speak, GCs will pass to the PC chairs, the EC will speak, and then we will have a town hall format where mics will be passed around like we do every year. So here's our segment. First, I just wanted to congratulate this organizing committee on the stage. There were so many people that helped that I recognize now that the font is too small to see, but we had a volunteer corps of more than 40 people who put in so much time, especially over the last 6 months, to make this conference a success. And the group of people on the screen did that without robust documentation. So this took a lot of improvising, a lot of creativity, a lot of bravery, and I am so grateful to the organizing committee. I'll wait for applause to thank them at the end. Yeah, sure. I also want to impress upon every one of you, because it might be somewhat invisible depending on where you sit in the conference, how much ITS Rio has done for our community this year. ITS Rio is a nonprofit independent research organization here in Rio, and the group of people that they have brought to help with FAccT this year, and all the support and expertise and brilliance and creative vision and matching of our programmatic goals to all the vision and genius of Latin America was brought to us by ITS Rio. So I'd like to especially thank Renata Guedes, who I will go into more depth about, Pedro Braga, our project officer. If you love the capybara logo as much as I do, yes. That was not only the contribution of Mariana Bertolucci, but somewhat of an intervention. And it wasn't just one excellent logo, but there have been numerous graphic assets to make an entire cohesive whole. So there's so much work behind the scenes from her. Thank you to Fernanda Duta, who managed the ITS events, and Cristina Alves, who was one of the session leads. And if you or your organization is looking to connect with Latin American expertise and research, I highly recommend ITS Rio for that purpose. I also wanted to thank Renata Guedes. It would be impossible to give the full list of the things that Renata has done, but she brings deep expertise in her career to event management, and so when it comes to helping us find the right vendors, corresponding with the vendors, making sure that they get paid, and on-site, all the little details that go to making a thoughtful event and doing something right. Renata gave that to us, so if you have a moment, please, if you find her at the end, and to say any thanks you have for us also belong to her. Thanks. We had an incredible student volunteer team this year. It was led by Cedric and Usman, and I have to say that this is a first that we have had such an international team, a multilingual team, and one that did not miss a single session. There was so much collaboration between them to find a way to get a person in every room, and then to work as a whole, to take all of your feedback, channel it to us, and make sure that every day we tried not to repeat the mistakes of the day before. So thank you, volunteer team. And like every year, we will go into more depth about our sponsors, but we'd also really like to thank these sponsors. You know, we'll go into exactly what we did with the funding, but it truly could not be possible without the support that we got from them this year. And I'm also really grateful to our sponsorship chairs for making this possible. Okay, so where are we this edition? Every year we have to fundraise for the edition and balance the budget. So we had a good sponsorship round. It was $380,000. And because of the exchange rate, our on-site costs were favorable for us this year. We can't expect that to be the case every year. We're seeing big fluctuations as we move between geographies. We are so proud of our high travel grant spending that we had this year. We had almost $250,000 on making sure that students, people from nonprofits, and others were here with us. So I'm just so grateful for that. That work was led by our DEI chair, Sarah and Emnet, as well as our financial chair, Umang and Valerie, and so we'll go into more about that as well. Our registration income was anomalously low, and some of that was the high number of vouchers that we gave out, but that's something to note as we keep track of the registration amounts over time and whether we need to adjust pricing. Another high-level takeaway is that while this year's organizing committee worked without a handbook, next year's organizing committee will be empowered with the most beautiful handbook brought to us by Larissa Lorimer. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah. And just a general takeaway for, this is mostly directed to the OC, that we recognize that communication channels need to improve, and so we have some changes in mind from Slack to meetings that's going to make for a cohesive whole as we move forward as a community. We also had setbacks this year, so in case you had not heard, there was an armed robbery. There were 4 attendees where a gun was pointed at them when they were leaving a social on Tuesday night. We are very, very sad to hear this and concerned, and I know that we'll be talking more about this, I'm sure, in the Q&A. Thankfully, everyone is physically safe, and we'd like to share any other information that you have questions about. We also wanted to acknowledge that we had more than one session that was really radical in envisioning activists from the global south, from all over the world, and advocates who could come and fly in and join us. But we are constrained by being under a set of funding frameworks that oblige us to reimburse people instead of advancing the funds. And the timelines are also very long, and that impacts our program. So we're working on ways to try to address this, but there's also a challenge up against the larger context of being an ACM organization that's hard to do for across the program. Our timelines were very compressed this year. We only really got the GC together around the new year, and then also the venue was only available early in the month, so that's something to acknowledge. And then we know there were streaming issues on Tuesday, but just an announcement, our amazing AV team has made backups of everything, and those backups will be loaded to the platform, so even if you missed something or there was a streaming issue, we're covered. We're proud that after a landmark report from Emnet Tafisi on how people might feel, yes, how first-time attendees to FAccT might not have the same connectivity socially, we were able to introduce a new program called Social Chair with Arjun Subramaniam and Renata Barreto, and they programmed 6 amazing socials that were especially focused on supporting marginalized communities and building power, building collective action, and they made that call in 3 languages. It is so cool to see the results of this social program. And you know, going back to what I was saying about the funding process, there are still gaps to get to where we would want to be or where our social chairs would want to be. And we need to keep pushing the horizon of possibility there.
Yeah, some statistics. So to the left, you see how people register, if that's interesting. So this emergent behavior in the middle is just the early bird deadline. So that's typical. So at the end, at least last night, we had 689 people registered. Of them, 555 were in person, but about 58 badges haven't been retrieved. So really, the people that came, at least as far as we know, was almost 500 people. And we had 134 online. And there you see the distribution of ACM members and non-members, how many are students or non-profit, academic, government, and then industry. So you have all the numbers there, and this will be public later. Regarding countries, we have a great geographic diversity. This was similar to what I presented the first day, but I fixed some mistakes and added the new people. So basically, we had 45 different countries from all continents, and Europe is the most represented, then Asia, Africa, and the number of countries. So that's very nice that you have Africa in third place. But if you count the number of participants, a bit more than half from North America, a bit more than a quarter from Europe, and a bit less than a quarter from the rest of the world. So I think that's it. And
thanks, Ricardo. So we also had a really exciting announcement by Sarah and Mnet this week. We have a new set of DEI scholars for 2024. And after a really competitive process and so many submissions, we landed on this set that will be, right now you see 5 scholars, but we'll have 6 DEI scholars who are each receiving a $15,000 fellowship. And the idea is envisioning alternatives, envisioning new worlds with AI. So in a competitive set, this group of people brought the most exciting and fresh ideas, and we're so excited to fund them and to connect both them and the honorable mentions to more funding opportunities. Yeah. Okay. And every year, we also release detailed information about our sponsors and have open books. This is something that I care very deeply about. So we had 3 sponsors this year at the level of $75K, and we had another set at $30K and below. And one of our longer-term goals that you'll hear more about from the EC is to diversify our sources of funding, so any one sponsor is not overly, we're not overly reliant on them. And we have around 42% of this funding from foundations and 58% from corporations. It's a little bit better than last year in terms of foundation funding, but only slightly. Okay, and here's how we spent that money. So, like I said, our registration is lower than usual. Usually we get about $200,000. It was $127,000 this year. And last year, they had $150,000 surplus in their budget. So every year the books close, ACM got last year's surplus, and we had a special projects request where we said, ACM, please give us some of this funding back. We'd like to use it for DEI scholarships, as well as supporting our travel grant program. So $90K of the special projects request went to travel grants, and 60 of it went to the DEI Scholars Program. We just covered the corporate and foundation funding, bringing us to this total amount of support, and we were also trying really hard to get to a 0 deficit. So I'm pretty proud that we landed in a place where we spent what we earned because we have to give back to ACM any surplus. Like I said, our need-based travel grants were around $250,000, and that includes the $90K from the special projects request. In order to get food and beverages for 400 and 450 people in 4 days and coffee service twice a day, that came to $70,000. We had, of the special project request, the DEI scholarships that I just mentioned. That's where that money is. Our venue is anomalously affordable. So our venue for all of the days of our conference was under $50,000. That is so wonderful for us, and we've had a really great experience here, so glad to be here. And the AV, which includes internet, slides in the rooms, the speakers showing the slides in the front of the room, but also beaming all of these things onto our platform. All of that together for all of the conference cost $46,000. That includes the labor time. We had a fantastic keynote program, and in order to get our keynotes here, we fly them out and give them modest honoraria. This is not a high honorarium. It's acknowledging that this is an academic program and that the people who join us are here because we want to platform what they have to say, but we will be spending our funding primarily on travel grants for students who can't afford to join us. Let's see. Our production support and project officers include our incredible production team that I'm going to thank by name, and as well as Renata and Pedro and the PC Chairs student they will name, but that came to $20,000. And all the hardware that you see, that's this stage and everything in the rooms, everything in all the different presentation rooms from the speakers to the screens, all that gets brought in and hardwired by our expert team. That is $28,000. We're really proud that we're in Latin America and we had Latin American language interpretation. We didn't do it for every room, but just to start this year, we had this room fully available in Portuguese and Spanish audio in person and online, and that cost us for all 4 days $10,000. We gave $5,000 to the social program chairs to allow the socials to have a little spending money for whatever they needed. And all of the other kinds of costs you might imagine amount to 11, but the ACM takes, I think it was a 16% overhead for 70, and that's how we landed the budget on a dime. Great. So a little bit more about these travel grants. There's a lot of intention that goes into who gets the travel grants and why. They pore over all the applications and ask for statements to make sure that the students who get them really need them and don't have other ways of getting here, et cetera. So there were 134 organizers and presenters that got travel grants and 173 total people. We were really lucky to have 20 Brazilian student volunteers this year, and I just have to say, we would not have been able to do this without the Brazilian student volunteers. They were the glue that helped all of our teams cohere, and we were able to pay for their travel to come out. Our overall goal is to reduce people's burden to attend, especially because our strategic plan says that our geography needs to rotate. That introduces its own kind of burden. And so our DEI chair's leadership was to say that we can't partially fund people for their needed request. We must fund all of the money necessary, otherwise they won't be able to join us. So we are fully funding requests this year, and we're able to provide lunch support. There were 167 people whose registration was waived, and also 16 discounts that we gave for anyone who's coming from Latin America, or this means gross national income tiers. So if you come from a low-income country, there were also discounted registration fees. Great. So the other codes are for codes that we give to the press, for example. And there was a little bit of funding left over after taking care of all the presenters and organizers, and that goes to the strategic award, which is to grow FACT community in Africa, in Latin America, to make sure that our volunteers are taken care of, to prioritize civil society organization presence, government, and the steering committee who do serve for us year on year. Long term, we're hoping that this funding will really help us grow sustainably and make our community even more vibrant. Great. So this is just a breakdown about registration and how many people were here. and how many people were online. These numbers are a little bit down, but we're right in the beginning of June. I think probably a lot of people had exams. So I just wanted to also, if you wouldn't mind coming on stage really quickly, Lucy, Alana, please just come up. I would like to thank our production team. They have been working so hard around the clock to make sure that all your slides are loaded, that all the volunteers know what to do. You've done so much for us. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much goes into it behind the scenes, and we truly couldn't do it without you. So thank you so much, Lucy and Alana. I love you too. Okay, so next we're going to be hearing from our PC chairs, then the EC, then we'll get to Q&A. And if we start to go long, don't worry, we really want to hear from you. We'll go long if we have to.
Hi, folks. You didn't see me on Monday. My name's Ruben Binns. I was just here on the mobile phone on Monday, but I'm one of the 4 PC chairs. So that's the 4 of us here. So just to recap, we're responsible for the construction of the scholarly program. So there's 4 of us. There are 105 area chairs, 597 program committee members, and they all contributed 2,777 reviews. A few things new this year. So we have these 6 topical areas that we use to tag papers and reviewers, and we use that to allocate bidding. And there were up to 2 per paper or per person. So those were audits and evaluation practices, system development and deployment, experiences and interactions, critical studies, law and policy, and philosophy. We also introduced statements, ethical statements, researcher positionality statements, adverse impact statements, which Alex is going to explain in a minute. And then finally, new thing this year was the short rebuttal, which was allowing authors to raise critical concerns they have with reviews, clarify misunderstandings, and signpost intended minor edits. So I'm going to pass over to Alex.
As Ruben mentioned, so this year we introduced, you can call them perhaps ethical statements. We made this requirement optional, but we provided an incentive to the authors by allowing them to use an extra page if they included these statements. And one of the motivation for this is that a lot of the AI conferences, right, NLP and AI conferences have already introduced some of these statements. So we've thought that would be great for FAccT to also have them. But we understand that they might not apply, right, for all types of papers, right? So not everyone. They don't, right? People might think that they don't make sense in all kind of cases. And we wanted to provide you some statistics about how adopted these statements were this year. So you can see that, so limitations were not part of the statements. We expected that is just a good practice. But the 3 new statements, positionality, impact, and ethical statements, you see almost half of the accepted papers have included them. And you can also see the breakdown by areas. And if you wonder that whether, right, accepted papers were more likely to include these statements, this seems to be mostly the case, and we think the difference between areas might mostly be due to different practices, or perhaps some For instance, something like ethical considerations, which is about the steps that someone might take during while conducting the research, might not make sense for something like more conceptual work. So.
So at a glance, just to give the overview of this slide, we had 725 papers that were submitted to FACT, and out of those 175 accepted papers. Some of the 725 that were submitted were desk rejected. They didn't meet the call for paper, so do make sure you read that very carefully. But all of those were considered on a case-by-case basis when making that consideration, and everything else was sent out to review. And out of those, we can people can opt to select whether their paper is archival or non-archival. Archival papers are fully published in the proceedings. Non-archival papers don't preclude publishing them in another venue. And that's important for some of the people and fields represented at FACT. But as you can see, we are a popular place for people to want to have their paper finally published in, with only 8 papers opting for the non-archival option. Out of that, we hovered around the 24% acceptance rate. You can count this very slightly differently if you count some of the just rejects or not, but it's 24 or 25%. And we awarded 6 Best Paper awards. We have authors from all over. This is an underrepresentation of how diverse these authors would be, because this is based on their primary affiliation. We don't collect diversity data on the authors themselves. That might be something in the future if we want to bring it up in discussion. And we know sometimes these processes can be quite arcane. They involve a lot of different reviews, area chairs. We actually had about 1.5 million words of reviews written for the FACT conference this year. So people really get some very large and extensive feedback, and we really want to thank all reviewers for this in particular. So do think, as we're going to the town hall, of anything you want to say or ask about the publication process, the research process, and so on, because we are here to demystify it. But also we'd love to hear your suggestions for those of you who've gone through it in varying capacities or been part of the process around that, and we're here to talk about that as well.
Boa tarde, pessoal. And also, I just want to ask if you reviewed for FACT, if you don't mind raising your hand here, if you reviewed or AC'd papers. So just a round of applause for everyone involved here. We know it's a lot of hard work, and it's your voluntary work that really makes this vibrant scientific community. So what I'm going to do next is that I'm going to give you a little bit of data behind the review process and also of the reviewer perception behind, at least as indicated through their review scores behind different papers. So we had 681 number of reviewed papers. These are papers that were sent out for review and not desk rejected. And we had a bidding process, which I'm sure many of you participated in, where and about 99% of the reviewed papers received at least one positive bid. And out of all of the reviewers, 86%, the majority of reviewers, bid for papers. The median number of bids per paper was 16. And the vast majority of papers, over 95%, received positive bids by at least 4 reviewers. So as we move on to other FACT iterations, I think it's worth reflecting about this paper matching process and also how it can be improved. This is a slightly complicated graph, so let me try to unpack this. What you're seeing on your right-hand side are the acceptance rates and number of papers submitted, tagged across different areas. Some papers are tagged across 2 areas, so this does not add up to the total amount that you saw before. And the acceptance rate of non-desk rejected papers was about 25%. And on the graph that you're seeing on the other side, on your left-hand side, are the quantiles and the overall average score given by reviewers. One thing that's worth noting is that papers submitted to the systems development and deployment track received on average lower scores from the reviewers. Again, I just want to keep in mind that the decision to accept a paper or not is not solely based on the score. This is based on an analysis of the entire review process by the AC and eventually by the program chairs. But this at least is the numerical data that we have of how reviewers perceive the paper. This trend also continues where you see papers tagged with philosophy, audits and evaluation, and systems development and deployment having lower average scores. Again, the way you should interpret this is that, for example, the 75th quintile of papers submitted in systems development and deployment had an average confidence-weighted score of 4. So 75% of the papers received scores below 4 out of 7, 7 being the maximal score. If you look at reviewer confidence in their reviews, interesting also, this year we observed the trend that papers that are more in the machine learning technical and algorithmic and math side and systems development and deployment also received lower confidence score and higher variance across reviewers. Again, this is only a snapshot of the data. If you're interested in learning more about the review process or maybe even diving into this data itself to understand how we can improve the FACT reviewing process, please reach out to us. We would be happy to talk about that. And finally, this year we had 6 Best Paper Awards. We announced them in the first day of the conference, and they're listed here again. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
The next bit is going to be from the Executive Committee with me speaking for us. All right, so hi, I'm Seth. I'm one of the members of the Executive Committee, me and Meg, and I'll tell you about the others in a moment. All right, let's run through. Okay, I wanted to start by saying thank you to the General Chairs. These things, they thank everybody else, and then it's left to, no one does the thanking of them. It's been an extraordinary conference. And I think they've done a wonderful job, just like everybody, to pause and just acknowledge the immense amount of work they've done. Okay. All right, let's just start with a little review. It helps, I think, with this conference. We meet once a year, just to kind of remind ourselves on what the kind of the collective project is here, like how FACT is governed. Okay, so let's start from the top. ACM is financially and legally responsible for FACT. FACT then is governed by bylaws and a strategic plan that you can find on the website. There's a steering committee that oversees an executive committee. The executive committee then selects general chairs and program chairs for a given year's conference. And the program chairs select the program committee. And as a matter of practice, over the last 5 years, the last 5 FACTs, the general chairs have selected the remainder of the conference organizing committee. This actually isn't how it is in the bylaws. It's a departure from that, and that's something we'll talk about in a bit that should be resolved. Any change to the conference bylaws require a quorum of a half of the steering committee to be present and a supermajority of 2/3. A reminder, so among our bylaws, we also have the strategic goals. So these are the goals. There's 8 of them: be a top-tier publication venue, be an interdisciplinary conference focused on computing systems, be open-minded about topics without compromising focus. This is the big tent principle. There's a big discussion of what it means to be a big tent. Innovate and lead on diversity and inclusion, maintain independence of governance, grow responsibly, respect the gravity of the research topic, and avoid being an island. Those are the FACT strategic goals. All right, so let's have a little look back at the last year. Okay, so for the executive committee, there's been a lot of turnover. We had 4 terms finished from long-serving executive committee members who all did wonderful work. That was Michael, Chato, Alex, Madeline Ellis as well. Myself and Maria de Arteaga, we continued. Each of us took leave for substantial parts of the year. Maria had a baby. I did a lap of Australia. 4 new EC members joined at different parts of the year. So Meg joined us as an EC member right after last year's conference. And Sarah Fox and Aziz joined, and Bert kind of joined at various stages, especially during the kind of early part of this year. The bylaws state that the EC should be composed of 7 to 9 members. I don't think we've ever actually managed to reach that. For most of the last year, it's been less than 4. Some periods there were only 2, and one of those was also the general chair at that time. So obviously, we've been pretty understaffed for the last year, and so the primary focus has just been on making sure that this year's conference happens, and that everything goes well. At the same time, we also managed to do a kind of the implementation of a very thorough review of the sponsorship policy. So that was a really important thing. I'll talk about that in a moment. All right, I'd like to address directly the statement on AI warfare that the executive committee made. And to give you a rundown of precisely what happened, I'll talk about what we're going to do next, but this is an account of events so that people know what happened when. I now can't see that screen. Okay, so on April 18th, the Executive Committee was asked to make a statement in support of a ceasefire in Gaza. On May the 24th, the Executive Committee released a statement on AI warfare. On May 28th, we withdrew that statement and apologized for it, adding a further call for an end to the Israeli invasion of Gaza. After that, on May 29th, the ACM advised the Executive Committee that ACM conferences are not to make public statements such as these, and instructed us to take all statements down. The Executive Committee then added additional text to each of our statements to clarify that statements by the Executive Committee do not represent the views of the ACM. No statements were taken down from the website. What are we going to do about this? Nobody thinks that went well. It was a bit of a, I can't say cluster the other bit. And we are going to ask for a review of this by the steering committee of the process that led to us making that statement, like the decisions that we made, the call that was made, and how that all happened. It will be up to the steering committee and the members of that to decide what of that they release. That won't be the executive committee's decision. We are going to ask the executive committee to convene a subcommittee to develop a policy to address whether and how FACT should make statements in the future. I think that the biggest lesson that I've personally taken from this is that we were improvising at a time when we had lots of other stuff to do, and in that situation, when you don't have a policy, you can make bad decisions. We are really glad that people have used the space provided by the conference to organize, to air their own views on these and other matters related to FACT. So, at the end of the day, that's what we most hope for. It's not that we speak, it's that you speak. And with that, I'll get to the next slide. So, we aren't brilliant at comms. So I don't know how many people here will remember that last year we had a sponsorship policy review, very thoroughly done by Maria Hildebrand and Solon Barocas. Over the course of the year since the last conference, we've implemented its recommendations. So you can see the review. It's been up on the website for ages. The key recommendations for the review were actually already incorporated into last year's sponsorship policy. And we made a bunch of changes to the conference bylaws. I won't read through them. You can read through them quickly if you like. Various different things were done. They were recommended, and you can follow that all on the website. Okay, our 2024 sponsorship policy was almost entirely the same as the 2023 policy. We changed one little bit to make sure that it was clear that the community socials could fundraise if they wanted to, because previously it was written in such a way that would have made that hard. Everything else was the same. We have a crap website, we know that, and also the most techie people on the EC left, and the rest of us didn't know how to edit it. So we didn't put that one up, and it's only just gone up now, so sorry about that. It was the same except for this one little thing, which was in order to enable community empowerment socials to fundraise if they chose to. They didn't actually choose to. As a reminder of what the procedure is, when we are deciding on who we're going to ask to sponsor the conference, the executive committee the sponsorship chair asks the steering committee to review a list of potential sponsors. Members of the executive committee aren't on the steering committee. That was one of the recommendations of the sponsorship policy review. The steering committee then look at those sponsors. They decide whether they want to raise any objections to them. Any sponsor that has 2 objections or more raised to it is then put to a vote. In the event that the vote is then a majority vote. In the event that the steering committee is not quorate on that particular topic, then the executive committee decides by a majority. Before FACT 2025, the steering committee will again have an opportunity to vote on the sponsors. So it's not like a sort of, you accept a sponsor 1 year and then forever they are kind of endorsed. It's done every year repeatedly. So there will be an opportunity for feedback in the post-conference survey on this year's sponsors. So I know people have lots of views about this. This is a discussion people have been having. That's how you can operationalize that, by speaking in that context through your survey. Also, you can find out the members of the steering committee on the website. Okay, we didn't get to do an awful lot else in the last year, but we did do some things I want to tell you about. Obviously, FACT 2024, bringing on some new steering committee and EC members, building up the conference handbook, which is going to be really important. We are getting through the process of recruiting conference organizers for 2025, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, and reviewing dates of submission and conference dates for 2025. We've had our first community calls. This is one of our attempts to kind of create a greater amount of communication in between conferences. Obviously, that's also been made slightly hard by the fragmentation of social media. But we had a really interesting one based on Mnet's Blooming in Muddy Waters report, that actually was what led to the community empowerment socials. So it was a good example of how the conversation through the community calls then led to a new event within the conference. We also, during the year, did the ACM special project request in order to get the funding for the DEI scholarships and the travel grants. All right, so next year, FAccT 2025 will be in Athens, Greece, which is very exciting. We wanted to give you some certainty about when what the timeline will be. So, paper submission will be in the first week of February, and the deadline will be 1 week before. The conference will be in the last week of June, so those of you who are on quarter systems will be able to attend without worrying about it. In the post-conference survey, there will be a call for volunteers, and we'll be announcing the general chairs soon. Something that we will need to be aware of for next year. ACM is switching to an open access format, which is going to require people to, well, it's going to be the case that institutions have a relationship with ACM. That will affect whether or not individuals have to pay for the open access publication of their work. If we have resources to do so, we'll try to make sure that the people whose institutions do not have relationships with ACM, who would otherwise have to pay for the open access fees, will be covered by the conference. But that will just be a matter of whether we have resources. We're going to find out more about this and we'll report back. It might be something for a community call. All right, so plans for next year, for the coming year. Yeah, turn the page and let's review. We need to sort of have a bit of a think, partly because our strategic goals are now 5 years old, and they are intended to be reviewed every 5 years. So I described them at the beginning in part to get you thinking about this, because while we will have a process, again, that will involve members of the steering committee, and that will it will be based on gaining community participation and hearing what people actually want the strategic goals to be. There'll be various different ways of doing that that will happen over the course of next year. We also want to review our bylaws because they are 4.5 years old, written at a time when FAccT was less than a quarter of the size that it is now. And as I pointed out at the beginning, there has been some rather substantial divergent drift in practice from the bylaws. So we need to review. We need to decide whether or not we want to kind of stick with the practice of the last 5 years or whether we want to revise the bylaws. We obviously also need new policies on whether and how FAccT makes statements. We will have a subcommittee that works on that. That will be something that is decided by them over the course of the next year. I've been talking a lot about the steering committee. It's a really important role, and we have people cycling off. We need to have new people come onto the steering committee, and there will be a process for adding people to the steering committee, and that will allow for self-nominations. Okay, so that's something that we did last year, we'll do again this year, and it's worth knowing as well that, according to the bylaws, the EC members are going to be drawn from the steering committee. Okay, so that's a really important way for shaping the future of FAccT. Another thing that we're going to try and do over the next year is have better communications practices. Like our website obviously sucks. And Slack, we've only got the free version of Slack, so we can't remember anything more than 90 days ago, which is tough. But obviously, we don't have money in between the conferences, right? So it just means someone is going to have to pay and then hopefully get reimbursed in the next conference. We don't have our own financial existence. All right, so the upshot of all of this is that if you care about FAccT, then there are lots of roles that you can play. So we are governed by our bylaws and our strategic plan, even if we don't always perfectly follow our bylaws. Reviewing those documents is the practice of shaping the future of FAccT. Those reviews are going to be led by steering committee members. So if you want to help shape the future of FAccT, nominate yourself to be on the steering committee. Nominate people who you think of as good representatives for you to be on the steering committee. And if you want to help make FAccT 25 a success, then you must just self-nominate for the organizing committee in the post-conference survey. It's really, really useful to have that as a resource. So for this year, people who volunteered in Chicago really helped us fill some crucial roles. So it's a really valuable thing to do. All right, so the Q&A is going to happen. I'd like to invite the program chairs, the general chairs back up to the stage, and I think that Meg's going to MC.
Everyone come on stage. It's now the most important part of it is hearing from you. So we'd like the mics to go to whoever raises their hands, and these can be questions or comments. It would probably help us if you specify if it's a question or a comment, and as soon as you're ready.
I guess I should stand up. Hello. I wanted to ask a question about the review process, specifically about shepherding. So I was an area chair this year, and I sometimes felt a little bit hamstrung when there were either divergent opinions on the committee because all we could really do was decide to reject the paper in its entirety or to accept it, and strongly encourage the authors to make changes because there wasn't a formal shepherding process. And I was just curious if the PC chairs could engage with their thoughts on the value of that for the next time around.
So I think we agree. Would be good if we get to a point where we have more of a revise and resumes kind of process where authors have the opportunity to address the comments. That was not possible this year with the timeline we had to work with. We introduced a rebuttal more to respond to some concerns from last year where authors felt like they had no mechanism to push back to reviews they've seen as problematic. So that was the purpose of the short rebuttal. It was very short because we really didn't have time for more. And I think there, as a community, we need to decide if we believe that for the type of work that we do, a process that includes the opportunity for authors to revise their work makes more sense.
It would also be very good to hear from members of the community about other conference and publishing models that they're aware of, both in ACM and outside. We've heard a lot, and I think it's over the years, about journal models, other models with multiple submission points and so on. These have positives and negatives. It's not for us to make a statement about what will be good or bad in the future, but certainly we've received a lot of representations around that. And we do find that as program chairs also this year, you definitely found cases, and we found some cases, need to go into individual papers because that's not appropriate, I think, where there were edge cases that we would have liked, and we did take action to sort of fill the gaps that would have been needed by these processes to make sure the papers got a fair hearing and the reviewers' concerns could be addressed within the practical constraints that we had. And so there was, like in all cases for program chairs, there is an amount of discretion to make sure that all of these, the processes and reviews get heard, and the reviews assigned to papers are appropriate with the appropriate reviewers and similar. So we'll continue to do that, and I think future program chairs will continue to do that, and that's important in an interdisciplinary conference.
I want to note that we just announced the timeline for 2025. So the 2025 program chairs have not been selected, and their timeline is already fixed. So it's going to take time to do these things. And so they mentioned their constraints, and it's important that everyone knows how early those constraints are put in place.
Hi, I have probably not a relevant question, but not a relevant question, but why do you choose the capybara as animal of this year?
We had an extensive debate about the appropriate animal in a country of phenomenal animals. And I've come to understand that the capybara is highly associated with Rio, but it is not in the first place an animal that came originally from Rio, and so a true carioca will dispute our identification of the conference with the capybara. Anything you wanted to add?
Hi, thanks so much for explaining how the sponsorship works and that you all review and discuss who the sponsors might be before you approach them. I had a question, maybe it's for the sponsorship chair, but one of the sponsors that's new that I noticed this year is the Survival and Flourishing Fund. And I wanted to ask what the review process was. How are you thinking about this being mission aligned with FACT when you approach them? Thanks.
Sure. So this reflects, to my understanding, a change in direction for the Survival and Flourishing Fund. And it grew out of conversations about their desire to support fairness and accountability work. And so the process was the same as for the other conferences. For the other sponsors, we put it to the steering committee. The steering committee had the opportunity to kind of assess and make any comments. Nobody raised any objections to Survival and Flourishing Fund. I think that their documentation online is not particularly up to date. So the statement of priorities that one can see by sort of Googling them doesn't really reflect where they're at now. One thing they're actually doing is they've got a new funding round, which is $3 million for work on fairness, which is a really exciting new funder for this area. So yeah, the basic story is that there has been a bit of a change in direction, or an augmentation. I won't speak for them, but they are interested in supporting more work on fairness. They've also got another scheme on freedom. So yeah, and it was a very welcome support for the conference that we used to do really good things. So.
Hi there, my name is David Gray-Witter. I'm with Cornell Tech and Against Carceral Tech Pittsburgh. My favorite part of the conference was the panel yesterday with, I got to learn from activists and others here in Rio with live translation, which is something I've never seen before, and I know that probably took a lot of labor to set up, so thank you. My questions are two. First, thank you for explaining how the process works for objections to sponsors. In the spirit of transparency, which is at least in some old version of the name, I don't know, for FAccT, or it spells something right now, but I was wondering if we could make sponsor votes into a roll call vote instead of an objection process, where the steering committee votes on each sponsor, and then those votes are transparently made public. I understand we have a diverse range of views in the room about what sponsorship is acceptable and what isn't, but having transparency into how the governing committee of this conference feels about each sponsor, so not an objection process, but a vote on each one, and having those votes public, I think would be really helpful for a more open and a more shared governance model for this meeting. Second of all, I know that a lot of us study how institutions become ingrained in thinking and in processes, and it's sometimes hard to break out of that those lines of thinking. And my partner is a historian, and she's a professor of history, and she attends history conferences that somehow thrive without the sponsorship of war profiteers. And there are certainly downsides to that, right? She doesn't attend conferences outside of the US, and there are a lot of trade-offs in those decisions. I certainly know where I would draw those trade-offs, and I had a wonderful conversation over dinner with folks who might draw those differently. But I think that those trade-offs are something that we ought to acknowledge and openly discuss, and acknowledge that there are other futures possible, and then have those discussions about those trade-offs in a more open process. I'm open about what that form of openness might be, but I think there are ways to have this conference in different ways that might be cheaper, but then might give up something.
I have a feeling like a few of us might want to speak to this. We have people here who are on the executive committee, the DEI chairs, and on the steering committee, so maybe I'll just start us off. I think that's an interesting suggestion around the idea of making the vote transparent. That would require us to sort of make a change to the policy that we need to be approved by the steering committee. And so I suppose I'll let them speak to that. I don't have any strong views, personally. And I don't think the EC does either. The point about kind of being able to have conferences with less money, completely agree. I think it's worth saying that there was a very thorough sponsorship policy review conducted by Mireille and Solon. I think it's like a 30-page document that goes into all of those questions. It's perfectly open. It's there on the website. We talked about it at the last conference. So I really would encourage people to look at that and see whether you think that there's something that they didn't cover, or that there's something that you would want to add to it. And then again, beyond that, I think that self-nomination for the steering committee is a great idea to be able to kind of decide on these things. And I think that everybody on the steering committee is acutely aware and is thinking very seriously about all of these problems and all these questions. And just on the money point, I'm a philosopher. Like, the idea of a conference with a $650,000 budget, wow, unreal. But then again, on the other hand, we do amazing stuff with that money. So, you know, there are serious trade-offs. Does anybody else want to speak to this?
I care very deeply about the sponsorship question, and I am available to keep thinking about this as a community, but I just wanted to use the same space to say how incredibly nourishing it is for our thinking that we were here in Rio in Brazil this year and in Latin America, and that there's absolutely no replacement to me for the global scope of the conference because of the global scope of the platforms that we study. And I'm so, so grateful to our colleagues from all over the world. So that's the only piece I wanted to add.
From a diversity and inclusion perspective, I want to highlight the ways that transparency, like, it's super important, but it also makes people vulnerable. And we already have trouble getting people to do work for no pay. And so the more people's names are associated with specific votes and specific things, it opens them to attack. Like, people like to call people out on Twitter. And we don't want to force the people who are providing essential labor to our community to be super isolated. And like I think many people might resign if every single vote, like, I personally would resign from the steering committee if I had to publicly vote on every single item. Because I think that there are people who are impatient, and I don't want to be attacked on the internet, but I do really care about this community. I also want us to think carefully about how there's no good money. Like, all money has been tied up in colonialism and slave trade and terrible things. And the way I personally think about it is that the bad money is when money comes with strings or conditions. And FAccT has what I think are really important and really powerful controls on that. Like, our sponsors don't get to tell us anything. They give us money and we do what we want. And they accept those terms. And I think that that's a source of power for us to retain, and not like, oh, we're washing their money. Like, that's not the case, right? Like, we collectively often lack that power to do things, and they have the money, and so we have an opportunity to take it and do really exciting things, like sponsor junior scholars to do an independent project that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to fund. And so we want to maintain our power, we want to push back against corporations hoarding and greed and all of that, but we also need to make sure that we are sustaining ourselves as a community.
Mine is just a comment about the capybara. They do hang out by the lagoon, so if you want to see them live, just don't pet them or anything like that, but they'll be there. They're nice.
Also, it's the largest rodent in the world, so it's a good animal.
So this is kind of back to the reviewing topic and rebuttal in particular. I find myself super torn about rebuttal as a policy. I think I have been in a situation where it was like so important to me to be able to rebut something that a reviewer had said. On the other hand, I'm not always sure that it's effective, that any decisions get changed as a result, and there's a lot of labor invested and not much happens. So I was just wondering if you could comment on if you thought the process was effective from a program chair point of view, that rebuttals made a difference in some of the papers.
Thanks. Yeah, we did actually try to pull the data out. We hadn't had the time to do this, unfortunately, because it's quite hard to pull out that time changes in the system we use, but we think it is possible, so we're going to work on that. But we can talk also anecdotally, because what we maybe didn't mention really in the slides is like the sheer labor we spent going through every single paper repeatedly. The program chairs, it was not, as Flavio said, it's not a threshold. It was really a discussion. Anything falling within the borderline, we would have extensive meetings and read the papers and discuss them and read qualitatively everything, with the scores being an extremely loose guide to giving us a window in which to look at the papers and make those decisions at what is a very difficult borderline to decide. In terms of the rebuttal, there's not just the labor on papers and the authors. The labor is on the reviewers as well. To read these, we did find that in the majority of cases, multiple reviewers did read this, and so they would have discussions that sometimes were unhelpfully behind the scenes in the comments, and scores were changed. Quite a lot of scores were changed, and quite a lot of comments were changed, particularly, well, actually in both directions we found, and that can happen, mostly because there can be further clarifications around method, and when the answers reveal further information about the paper, that can go that way as well. So I think we did find it was useful, and it also flagged up important information that allowed us as program chairs to make the decision as well, because what you didn't see as paper authors is that qualitative process where when we were deciding on the borderline, we would also be looking at the rebuttal. And if the reviewers had not sufficiently engaged themselves in scores, it was not the case that that labor in the rebuttal was ignored in that decision process. And in fact, that is an extremely useful point for us to see the whole narrative in the round. So I think that was probably what I'd say. In other conferences, area chairs have a lot more autonomy. I think these are also conferences where the norms of area chairs are much more built in, particularly computer science conferences where people understand, okay, an area chair is this kind of role, whereas if you tell someone in philosophy or law, they've not seen this before as a concept, and so there's a lot of guidance that's needed to work out what responsibilities and role you actually take here. And we can do better work on providing guidance in that, and some of the work Meg was saying on the handbook will also help, but lessons learned that we can pass on in communication. But I would say, yeah, the qualitative nature of that rebuttal is listened to by the program chairs, and perhaps that is the most important role it plays in terms of the decisions, rather than changing scores, which we actually don't really care about as much more than just an indicator of direction.
I also want to re-emphasize something that Michael said. So it's not only about changing roles, right? It's also about how people feel about the process. The fact that people feel they have a mechanism, right, to if they think the reviewer misunderstood, right, they have a mechanism to say, no, I meant something else there. And for us, something that was really, really important was to communicate decisions with clarity. So we put a lot of effort. Perhaps we didn't do that perfectly, but that was a big part of our intention.
I just want to echo what Michael and Alex said. Like, I think like we still haven't done a deeper dive on the data behind the rebuttal and how folks engage with that. So what I'm going to say is anecdotal, but just like Alex said, I think it added an additional signal, for example, to flag really, like big misunderstandings with the paper, or maybe a reviewer who uploaded the wrong reviewer to the wrong paper, or and also give a chance for authors to address that. And I think one thing that's worth noting that Michael pointed to as well is that kind of the difference in expectations across different reviewers from different fields. So for example, if you look at machine learning conferences, there's almost an expectation for this rebuttal process. If you submit it to NeurIPS and ICML and so on, you already expect that. And oftentimes reviewers might even hedge their review until they see the rebuttal at the end. So I think for future PCs, this is something definitely worth reflecting on, but my impression is that at least this year, the rebuttal process was not, of course, it can always be improved, but it was positive overall.
Hi. Considering that the steering committee, among others, is going to be reviewing the strategic goals and bylaws going forward, I was wondering if you could all speak to the values that the FACT conference tries to put forward. I know there are many conferences and journals and things out there that bring together works based on discipline, but considering that this is a highly interdisciplinary conference and, you know, with a title that includes accountability and fairness, I think many of us have at least assumed that there are values that bring together the organizers and the participants. So I'd love to know what those values are for you and how you're making sure that the organization of FACT and the work of the participants at FACT align with those values. And I do want to point out two specifically, being anti-genocide and science being political.
All right, so I'll start. So look, I think that I actually really like our 2019 strategic plan. I think that the goals that are described there are really good ones. I like the fact that #1 goal is be a top-tier publication venue. I think that when I think about my sort of interest in and involvement in FACT, the way I think of it is, I think public interest research is necessary on this topic. I think that public interest research won't be directly paid for by for-profit corporations. And I think that universities are the only likely and kind of realistic kind of venue for the production of public interest research. I think public interest research will only be good if junior people starting their PhD think that they can work on a particular topic and get published in somewhere that will contribute to their PhD and will contribute to them getting tenure. And I think that the role of FACT, the role of it that I value most, is that it provides that kind of venue that enables people to do public interest research at universities and publish in a place where they can get tenure and keep doing this kind of work. So for me personally, that's my kind of, if you like, my favorite. I think my second favorite of the goals is the big tent goal that I mentioned. I like that a lot. I believe very strongly in value pluralism. I think it's something that many of us have written about in our work on AI. The idea that like any company or government should dictate what it is that everybody else gets to do. The notion that that should be something that is kind of, I think that is a really strong value of FACT, the idea that we are value pluralist, especially with respect to discipline, especially with respect to our kind of approach to academia, and then even across academia to practice and practitioners. So I think those are the goals that I value, and I think that the way we try to realize them, I mean, after all, we're a conference, we're not a state, we're not a university, we are a collection of people who meet once a year, and a subset of those people who try to make it possible for people to meet once a year. And I think that the way we realize those goals is by providing people with the space to organize, to talk to one another about these topics, to share their research, and to express their values.
Thanks. As one of the program chairs, I want to comment on the kind of the publication aspect of this and focus on that. I think one of the things that we might need to consider in the strategic goals, as a personal point of view, is what it means to be a top-tier venue. That comes with a lot of baggage from both computer science and from the United States method of getting tenure. In that way, what is recognized as research, what is recognized as a publication that is valuable, and that is not echoed in most of the world. That is not a concept. The idea of tiering a place does not really matter to people in law or political science or philosophy, at least not in relation to a computer science venue. And if we are thinking about, there's been discussions obviously about the statements and what ACM says about the statements and the structure that you sign up to in computer science, whether there is a role for FACT, also in light of the open access policy that Seth described, to want to shake up publication a bit more, shake up what a meeting means of academics and scholars, and what should occur here, and how much of that should be bound up in the institutions of the past and inherited, and how much we might want to actually be a source of change in that, and through that change, try to propagate that change to all different institutions, including US computer science departments, and have them challenge some of the ways they understand what is valid research in the field of computer science. And that's something that was also echoed in Sita's keynote earlier in the week. This one's on.
Okay, I just wanted to say that I appreciate your question and also the sense of disappointment, and I understand that disappointment. And I think that, you know, many of us have been here for a few years and might understand where I'm coming from when I said on the first day that I see FACT as a living thing. And that's because the group of people on this stage, every couple of years, they change. And the people who are disappointed, some people leave and influence from without. And some people stay and influence from within. And that engine has changed this conference, this meeting, so much every year that the fingerprints of the people who were critical in 2019 left an indelible impact on 2020 and so on. And I am really proud of that here, and I'm hopeful that the criticism of today can make us a stronger community. Thank you.
All right, before I get started, I have Dylan with some COVID questions.
Yeah, so long COVID is ending people's careers, and we have, at this point, tons of really inexpensive mitigation layers that are available to us, from ventilation, filtration, far UV lights, all sorts of different choices that we could be making. And I'm wondering why there aren't COVID protocols this year, and if there are plans to institute them in the future.
And also, so I'll pick up from there. Dylan has graciously donated 100 COVID tests, which are now at the registration desk. So if you would like to, get tested, keep the community safe. Yes, clap for Dylan, clap for Dylan. Dylan's been keeping us honest. And I do want to acknowledge also that's somewhat a failure on my part, because I am accessibility chair, so I do take some of that burden on me also. Last year I brought masks, and this year that kind of fell through the cracks, so that is on me. But in speaking about, I guess, self-reflection as a chair of the conference, I do have a lot of thoughts. I've heard a lot from the community who banded together. I think yesterday we had a session and we filled out, that entire lunchroom. We had only standing room. We asked volunteers to bring in more chairs, and the venue said, no, we're so over capacity that we can't bring in chairs. So there's a real sense here, I think, of the community who's shown up already, who are here, who are very unhappy about, I guess, the sponsorship policy and about the equivocal stance on Gaza, Palestine, and genocide. One thing I'll say is, yes, thank you. One thing I'll say is with the Survival and Flourishing Fund, right? The fact that no one on the steering committee seemed to oppose it, I think that's really worrying, because one, how come no one opposed it if they have certain problems that we definitely as a community reject? And two, how come none of the community members knew about this, right? I don't think the steering committee and the community members align in terms of our values. So talking about voting on the steering committees, I'd love a lot more transparency and community input, right? Can the community have a way to help select the steering committee instead of it being, behind closed doors? In addition, talking about sponsorship information, obviously the website's not great, but we should definitely have that online throughout the year. And again, I'm happy to help with putting that information up on the website every year. And then in terms of voting, right, the steering committee voting, to I think Sarah's point, so thinking about the worries of transparency with voting, this idea of, people on Twitter will get mad. What I have to say is, I'm obviously very active on Twitter. I get a lot of flack. I get death threats. It's fine. I speak up in that manner, and I continue to do so. And I still feel like I'm not doing the same amount of work where there are people on the ground at these encampments standing up for Gaza, signing all these petitions, who have been assaulted, who've been arrested, who've been shot at with bullets, right? Getting called out online pales in comparison to what people on the ground are doing. So, I do think we should have at least that level of transparency compared to the sacrifices that people are putting, right? These people are getting doxxed. These people, some have been killed, right, over their views standing up against genocide. So I encourage, I challenge the community to, step up and speak out, and not just say, we hear you, but do something about it because you have the power now. That being said, we as a community have written a letter in response to all that's gone on, demanding for refusal from certain sponsorships. And for those in the community, if you would like to read the letter, we'll post it on Slack with our bit.ly. And I can also read the link out real quick. It is, oh my gosh. Yes, it's ready to be signed and actually is in Slack. So I guess someone just posted it in Slack. So go on if you would like to sign on to this letter, read the letter. If you agree, sign on to it, demanding we don't take sponsorship money, that we have more transparency, that all the things I've said actually become operationalized. But yes, check the Slack. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like we all could do better. I think Sarah mentioned earlier, we need the money, but a lot of people aren't getting paid to support. Y'all know I've done stuff for the conference. I haven't gotten any of the money. I've refused I've been asked, right, I can apply for the DEI scholarship, all of this and that. I refused those. I didn't take conference funding this year. I refused that. So I do think we have power in refusal. And that's all I'm gonna say.
I just wanted to acknowledge that labor that went into the open letter and that comment that you just made, and that there have been comments like the one that you just made that really land in the room, that really shape the decisions. So I appreciate you speaking publicly and also holding this group of people to a high standard. And I'd like to follow up with you about the payment question, but it's impossible for me to move on without acknowledging that if you appreciated at all the program that was accessible via the web app, that was the sole labor of Wells who just spoke, and that there are numerous things that Wells jumps in and does and continues to do that without which this also wouldn't be possible. So Wells, thank you for both helping, but also speaking back to us, and your input really is important.
Quick shout out also to Emma Harvey, who also helped out with the program guidance.
Emma is amazing, and the scheduling chair, Emma Hart. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sebastian Tian, aqui no Brazil. I'm permanent resident in Brazil. I'm teaching and doing research in Brazil public universities for at least 4 years. In the northeast of Brazil, Recife, and in the south that was hit by the flood last month. And I want to share a feeling that what we lived in the last 4 days was nothing like the kind of academic conference we have in Latin America and in Brazil. And it felt much more like a US academic event teleported on the beach of Copacabana. In a really fancy hotel, and we are not doing anything like this. We are organizing our conference on campus, on the place where people are actually learning, teaching, and doing research. We have a lot of students participating to those events. In Brazil, we have something called scientific initiation. People from undergrad are already enrolled in a research group together with supervisor and graduate students working on research already at the undergraduate level. And when we have conference on campus, all of those people are going there. They are participating, they are hearing, but also bringing issues coming from scientific and technical dimension, but also social and political dimensions. And we basically had almost nothing like that in those 4 days we spent here. And in my opinion, this is showing a lot the colonial dimension of the American, North American, and European academia I'm coming from initially. And I think we can do much more than that, much better. And if there is one thing we can take on from this conference, it's that we need epistemic sensibility, reflexivity, even more when dealing with technology and society, and specifically in the conference dealing with fairness, accountability, and transparency. So that's it. Não era possível para mim acabar esta conferência sem compartilhar esta.
For me, it wouldn't be possible to end this conference without sharing this with you. I would like to thank all the Brazilian colleagues that tried to bring these issues to the conference.
colleagues from the rest of the world who open space, especially in the craft sessions, to bring the Brazilian reality inside of the thick walls of the conference. Thanks a lot.
So, muito obrigado. He organizado muitas conferências em Latinoamérica.
Thank you very much. We have organized many conferences in Latin America.
What you say, but for example, I didn't get any support from local universities here. I think the financial situation matters, so they don't want to take what it means to organize this. I was able to find ITS Rio. I knew them only by Zoom, and we did a great partnership with them. I'm really thankful to them. But they don't have a local to do this kind of conference. They are just an NGO. So what is better, to have it here in a hotel? We didn't go to the most expensive hotel in Rio, or not to have it. I think it's much better to have it, and we need to be pragmatic, and that was my decision, and you can blame me to do this conference in Brazil because we wanted to do it in Latin America. I'm new in this community, but I thought that was important to do it here in Latin America, and we have, I guess, the largest number of Latin American attendees ever. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for all the great work that you did. But I want to share an observation, and hopefully this can be turned into some improvement for the future. So obviously, FACT, by definition, is a diverse space for community-centered activities, political activism, but also a meeting of critical scholars. And we discuss here a lot of critical topics like AI, surveillance, war, and a lot of these events are not happening in the Western world, are, for example, happening in Middle East. Over the past 2 years, we have had no panel discussion, tutorial session or something where people with critical scholarship, expertise, from history, from philosophy, from social sciences, who would come and discuss these spicy topics. These are very spicy topics, the conception of ethnicity, race, that a lot of Middle Eastern kind of experience are different with theories of race in the United States, in the UK. And I personally, as a person who's been coming to FACT for many years, still feel alienated that theories of race in the United States do not translate to me. And I am white, but I am not white. So what kind of terminology we are developing here? And I feel like FACT maybe needs to add some more workshops, tutorials, etc., where scholars come and sit together and talk in a very democratic environment about a lot of issues around politics, about what AI is doing in Middle East, for example, as a place, how different dictatorial governments are using for AI surveillance. And I think we can have very good scholars contributing to these discussions in addition to political activism, in addition to community-centered work. So I really hope that in the next couple of years, FACT takes these sorts of suggestions seriously, and we see more critical scholarship in this space happening at FACT.
So one thing I want to say thanks to Wells for your comments. I deeply value your contributions and appreciate the ways in which we have been able to have one-on-one conversations where we disagree and explore that space. I think that's really important. And to this question, I want to first give a very practical answer, because sometimes that's my first go-to, is that I have very high faith that if such a thing was submitted, it would be accepted. And if there are barriers to submitting those kind of things, and you don't know how to do the tutorial process, you don't understand how it works, I think as diversity and inclusion chairs, we are really happy to help demystify that process. So our email, and it's for us even if who we are changes, is inclusion@factconference.org. And I want to encourage anyone who's I wish FACT had this, and I don't know how to make it happen, to email us, because we get to see everything. We have a lot of visibility. We don't necessarily get to make all of the decisions, but we do get to see how everything works. And so we can talk to you and be okay, so you want this to happen. This is what that means. This is how to get it in. And that's how we can make things happen. So inclusion@factconference.org. And we can decode and demystify and help remind you and get you on the right listserv so that you know how to propose whatever content you want to see at FACT. And we want people to feel empowered. And so if there's something you want to see and you haven't seen it, like, someone has to do it though, and maybe that's you, and maybe we can help you, and we can use a network. The EC is a lot of people, and they're very happy to, and the SC, everyone's happy to use their network, but we can't hear you if you don't say it out loud for us.
So can I just add something to that? So one thing is to say that Sarah and Mnet, as the DEI chairs, sit in on all the executive committee meetings. So it's worth just sort of acknowledging the massive amount of work that involves, because not only is that all the executive committee stuff, they're also the DEI chairs for the conference. Now, one thing that I think that is, I'm sort of drawing from your comment there, Atuza, is that there's a certain kind of way in which we framed craft and tutorials that has left it so that people maybe think that they can't submit something like that within one of those headings. Because tutorials, it feels like it should be didactic, you know, like a lecture on a topic that people might not know about. And craft, we've really focused over the last few years on making very strongly focused on civil society. And I'm glad that the person who commented before reflected on the really good involvement of Latin American organizations in the craft program. One thing that we've been discussing as a possibility for next year is to kind of take a little bit of the time from the tutorials, a little bit of time from the craft, and actually have an explicit workshop space where it can just be for whatever people think is worth having a bit of time spending on without it necessarily having to fit into the tutorials or the craft frame. Some people are already doing that. There was the socio-technical AI safety workshop, for example, was within a tutorial format. And I think that like making it more explicit to everybody who's interested will empower more people to kind of make more of these sorts of suggestions. So at the very least, I think that is a way of ensuring that there's more direction from people who are interested in attending FACT in what the actual content of the program will be over and above the content of the research program and the plenary sessions.
We're probably at time. Raise your hand if you're speaking. Yeah, well, this will be our last one. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, Meg, I was just going to come in on this, actually, because what we haven't talked about in this whole space was the research program. This goes back to what we were saying before about the incredible US influence on the nature of FACT and the computer science influence on the nature of it, and the potential problem that I think will be interesting to surface with the steering committee's review of the strategic plan about whether this should be a top-tier publication venue focused in computer science. One of the reasons of that is that conferences in other spaces are not places where you deliver final papers polished with everything very, very polished at the end. In other disciplines, they are more works in progress. They are places for discussion, refinement, and the publication process looks very different after that. We do find, and it's something that we've tried to work on, but it's extremely hard to work on, that we do get very big bias in the nature of the type of people who submit to FACT, the geographies from where they submit. When you do find people who are from around the world, they often may have a nationality from one place, but they have experience in a United States research context, and therefore they know how to code switch into that space to do that kind of publication. And I don't think that as a conference we have the ability to capacity build in a US, nor should we maybe, in a US direction within the majority world research institutions. I'm not sure that's our role to do that capacity building there, to say now you can submit to this thing with this standard. Instead, I think we have to think very hard about what research and the process of research and bringing people together in a point where travel is very difficult and expensive around the world, and also tiresome and comes with public health risks, that we're bringing people together for a purpose rather than maybe just to read out a list of proceedings. And maybe there's something else we can do in that space that also deals with your question at the same time.
Yeah.
So the last question here.
I just want to make a quick comment as well. Eu não peguei o seu nome. Qual que é?
I didn't get your name. What was that? I'm going to answer in Portuguese, Sebastian. I think your point was very relevant. The question for FACT in the future and the Brazilian community is why we are having this conference in a 4-star hotel and not within the Brazilian universities. I am a fruit of the Brazilian university in Brazil. I'm only here because of the work of my professors, and this is a very important point. I think that here we have this illusion of comfort, but it's not necessarily the way we could get impact with this conference. Thank you so much for your question.
Hi, thank you for putting all of this together. I'm new to the community, and I thank you for presenting the timeline about the statements. I was really pleased to hear that FACT refused to take down the statements even after ACM said that. I think that shows that FACT has power. There's also been a lot of discussion of ethics washing in the last few days. I think, so this goes for sponsors as well as ACM, that we're doing something for them by accepting their money and accepting their affiliations. And so I think even if there were such a thing as no strings attached funding, I think we can do better. We can attach some of our own strings. So I really hope that the leadership and the community will push back on ACM and this idea that science can possibly be apolitical, as well as on the sponsors and sponsorship policies and all of that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we agree on many things, but sometimes we have different ways to do things. I'm talking about personally, but I'm proposing, I'm part of the U.S. Technology Policy Committee, and I'm proposing this topic to discussion. I hope I win the battle because I'm a minority, but maybe ACM, part of ACM will change their mind. That will be my contribution from the inside, not from the outside.
Thank you also. I wanted to say thank you for that comment. And definitely, we will continue this conversation on the sponsorship policy and the additional desiderata that you've raised. We've gone deep into lunch because this time matters so much to us, but we're really grateful that you stayed. This, to me, again, is the most important part of the conference, and thank you very much for staying and sharing and listening, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Don't leave. Don't leave. We have a final video to thank you. So just wait for 1 minute for the last video.
I come Brazil. Brazil I came.